Okay, well, this is happening now. Just, are you ready for it, Barry? Are you ready for it? It seems like there's a lot of information being dumped on us in general in all of manga. You know, like we got all that information in One Piece a few weeks ago, and now we got this in Attack on Titan. We got Ymir's backstory, what actually happened to this poor little girl, and now, right now in the story, this apocalyptic Ragnarok level event is occurring. Do you hear it, Barry? Do you hear it in the distance? Just that gentle, just rumbling? Just. Oh. Okay, so, yeah, chapter 122 of Attack on Titan, Isayama, he brings it, and we find out all the stuff about Ymir, basically separating fact and fiction, because up until this point in the story, it was very ambiguous exactly what was this, being Ymir. Was she even human, really? It was like, there's, stories where she was making pacts with devils to obtain Titan power, and then there were other stories that the Marleyans spread, oh no, she was this horrible devil that just wanted to bring the end of the world, and that's what the rumbling is going to be. It's going to be this epic apocalyptic event, like I said, Ragnarok, basically, that's going to just level the entire world, right? So just crush everything beneath the feet of these millions of colossal titans, right? So we find out this. Now, I'm pretty sure most people understand at this point, if you've been reading Attack on Titan, even if you haven't been that into the lore of it, like figuring out what the inspiration for a lot of these things are, you could probably just determine that Isayama really enjoys using Nordic and a little bit of Celtic mythology in his story, right? So we're gonna be delving into that today because Ymir's backstory was there was a lot of it in there. Maybe you caught some of it, maybe you didn't. I don't know. I'm not even sure I caught all of it. But yeah, we're gonna go into the stories regarding that today, talking mostly about Ymir and who she was or who she is right now, and then about the rumbling itself and where the story is going, because this is pretty much like the grand finale when you literally have millions of colossal titans breaking out of these walls that are like huge, that surround humanity, and now the walls are coming down and these titans are beginning to move. Like you don't really have much time left in your story, right? Like, so this is like the final epic battle, right? So let's start by just a quick recap of what went down here. All right, so Ymir was a little girl and was part of a tribe that was conquered by the Eldians way back when, about 2,000 years ago, by the then king Fritz. Okay, now we do not know what tribe Ymir was originally part of. We knew she was not an Eldian, and she might have been a Marleyan, maybe, but it wasn't really explicitly stated that she was. Might have just been part of this random village out in the country. King Fritz, you know, he has this big Eldian empire, and he was just ruling over the land, and they attacked the village, and then took Ymir's people as slaves, removed their tongues so they could not speak. One day, there was a pig that went missing from its pen, so the king kind of called out all of the slaves, and is like, which one of you freed this pig? And all of the other members of Ymir's tribe just pointed directly at her as the culprit, and the king, because he was such a nice guy, decided to set her free. In the forest, by herself, being chased after by a bunch of ravenous dogs. So, you know, that kind of free. So, Ymir ran through this forest. She was shot at with arrows and chased at by dogs, and she was bleeding. She eventually came to a very large, very strange-looking tree in the middle of the forest, and the tree had, like, kind of an opening in the middle of it, so she wandered into that opening. She fell down into a chasm, some kind of abyss. It was filled with water. She landed in the water. She began to drown. At that same time, there was this strange spine centipede-looking kind of creature. Might not be calling it a creature, might not even be accurate, but there was this spine tingly kind of looking thing in this abyss, in this like little well underneath this tree, and it attached to Ymir, and it was through that interchange that she became the first Titan, the founding Titan. And through that, you think that she would use that power to, like, decimate the people that have oppressed her and her people. However, because she was very much in that slave mentality and kind of brainwashed to believe that, you know, she has to take orders, King Fritz used this power that she now exhibited to expand the Eldian Empire even further. So that comes from the mythology that the Eldians were learning about from the owl, you know, back in Grisha's, you know, past and his flashback and everything. How it's like, oh yes, our our great god Ymir, she created roads, and she divided the mountains and built cities. That's where that comes from. It was not in the sense that she was such a, like a benevolent deity that she's like, I will bring prosperity to the land. No, it was not because of prosperity. It was to increase the power of the Eldian Empire led by King Fritz. So he forced her to do that, okay? So part of that is true, but the motive behind it is not exactly. So eventually, King Fritz allowed Ymir to, like, the honor of bearing his children. Their 3 children were named Maria, Rose, and Sheena. 3 names of the walls, so there we go. I think that was already, stated before. We already knew that. So at that point onward, she just continued, expanding the Eldian Empire with her Titan power. At this point, she was the only Titan, so keep that in mind. All right, the other Titans were not in play yet, right? So she has her Titan power. She has 3 kids with the original King Fritz, okay? And then they were beginning to crush the Marleyan Empire out of existence, okay? Eventually, there was an assassination attempt to be made on King Fritz. Ymir, because of her, brainwashing as a slave, jumped in front of the spear and took it. Now, even though she was a Titan and she could easily heal that wound, she chose not to, and she died there. And so that begins the thing with, like, no Titan can live longer with Titan power than Ymir did, which was 13 years since she received the power. So that was a question we all had for a very long time. What exactly was the thing that killed Ymir, because no other person that has Titan power can live longer than she did. Okay, so it was her action as a slave to protect King Fritz, but I also believe it was like a little bit of a semblance of her original personality of who she really was, that, she's like, I don't want to come back from this. I could heal myself, but if I did that, I would just be coming back into just, oppression, and the chains would never leave me. So I'm just going to drift away into death here. However, that didn't even really work the way she planned it, because she ended up in this land, the coordinate or the path, whatever you want to call it. She ended up in this place, and in the aftermath of her death, King Fritz forced his children to eat the remains of Ymir so that they could retain the Titan power. And this was actually something this was something crazy, because this was actually already shown in the anime. If you go back to the second ending of Attack on Titan, well, the Season 2 ending of Attack on Titan, you can see this scene in that ending. You see this king, or this kingly figure, forcing children to eat his, like, somebody on the table. We didn't know who it was back then, but it was Ymir, right? So, yeah, that's just crazy that we found out about that. And you know what? Even back then, I was a little weirded out by that ending of Attack on Titan, because it was like, okay, we were seeing, like, the scene between Ymir and the devil and the pact that they made apparently right here. And this was well before we get that in the anime. Like, we don't get that until Grisha's flashback, when he's learning all about the history of the Eldians and everything. And here we are in Season 2, well before that flashback that happens at the end of Season 3. Like, we just got that at the end of Season 3. And here it is in the at the ending, and here we are getting it. So, yeah, so there's some other interesting stuff really sprinkled through that ending. Very interesting stuff there. But anyway, yeah, so Ymir and King Fritz's children then attain the Titan power, which is now separated into 9 distinct Titans, the Founding Titan and then all the other ones beyond that. And it's very likely that each one of these Titans represent a different fragment of Ymir's personality or her desires for the future. The one that's the most obvious is the Attack Titan, representing her ultimate will to eventually become free from this whole never-ending chain of events. Ymir is also the one in this other realm where she molds clay together to create the Titan bodies that the shifters use. And it's, I guess, also implied that every single Titan, even the pure Titans, the ones that aren't the shifters, they have their bodies molded for them by Ymir in this other realm. And we saw this when Zeke was blown up by that explosion with Levi and everything. He awoke in this place where time was seemingly non-existent. Time was simultaneously, it was like I was in there for years, but I was also in there for only an instant. So time was kind of wacky in this world, and Ymir as a child was molding his body back together with this clay. Alright, so she's the crafter of these Titans, and she is, as Zeke stated, she is nothing but a slave to the royal family, so she has no will of her own. She must listen and obey to whatever the will of the royal family is. So, yeah, that brings us up to where we're at now. So a few things. I gotta, okay, in order to make sense out of this, I kinda gotta give you a crash course in the, Norse creation myth. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, because once I get into it, you'll really begin to understand, like, where this all connects back to it. If you're not somebody that's really into studying mythology and history and stuff, and you're reading Attack on Titan and you're just like, man, this feels like there's a bunch of symbolism and depth to this, but I'm not sure really what it all connects back to, well, I guess this is the video for you. All right, so let's get started with this. All right, so the first thing I should probably say about this is that the people that crafted this mythos, the Nordic people, so the people that lived in what is now like Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, those regions of the world, a big thing in their culture was the elements, because they lived very north. So most of it, a lot of sunlight is like perpetual sunlight, very cold. They would have the aurora borealis around them. So a big part of their mythos is actually giving life and a personification of the elements around them, like the fire and the water and the ice. All of that kind of has a really strong meaning to it in Nordic mythology, okay? And so at the very beginning, there's a void, as with most creation stories, but not really. It's like there's this giant chasm right in the center of all existence, all right? Giant chasm. And on one side of that chasm is the realm of fire, where Surtur rules over, and on this other side is a realm of water and ice, where this stream, this cauldron that begins from this cauldron, and there's these streams that roll down this hill and create ice and icebergs and stuff like that, and all of it kind of just meets in this grand chasm and begins to slowly fill up with ice and fire, steam billowing from this chasm. And in the center of that chasm, in this icy, frosted wasteland, Ymir is created. Ymir, in the context of Nordic mythology, is not a small, tiny little girl. No, he's a large giant, an ice giant, one of the first ice giant, okay? So I like to think Isayama at that point was just screwing around, like, with the exact opposite, because it's like Ymir in mythology is like huge, giant man, but no, in Attack on Titan, tiny little girl. I'm like, but also with the strength of gods, as we see later. So that's interesting, right? Okay. So Ymir comes into existence, also known as Orglimir, or seething clay. I apologize for the pronunciations here. I've heard some of these, but not all of these, and I'm not Nordic, so I apologize for that. But anyway, yeah. So also called Orglimir, or seething clay, comes into existence. Now, after you just sprang into existence from ice, like, well, what are you gonna do? Well, you're gonna be pretty hungry, right? So he just starts wandering this, frosted, steamy landscape, and there's a cow there, just hanging out, the giant cow. And so Ymir decides to lay down and suckle from this cow's udders for nourishment. And while he's doing that, the cow decides, hey, I'm just gonna take my mind off this and begin to lick this giant ice block next to me. And out of that ice block, it slowly melts as it's licking it. Out of that ice block comes Buri, the producer. Buri is the father of Odin and his siblings. Odin had siblings, but that's not important right now. I'm not going to get off track and talk about them, all right? So basically how this is going here is that the cow licked this ice block and the gods kind of came into play in this world, okay? Meanwhile, after Ymir was done suckling from this cow's udders, he falls asleep, and out of his armpit sweat comes a man and a woman giant, and then from his feet comes a six-headed sort of behemoth giant, and that giant has a child, which is the progenitor of all of the Jotun, in Jotunheimr, the ice giants, okay? So, yeah, now, at this point, the giants and the gods, they don't like each other. They start this massive epic war, okay? Ymir is eventually killed in this war, and something that you probably noticed here with the armpit sweat and everything, and the giants being born out of his feet, the physical body is like an actual significant thing here in Norse mythology. Gods are not thought of as like, ethereal creatures or anything. No, their physical forms are actually really relevant because it is out of Ymir's body that the earth is crafted. Okay, Midgard is created from Ymir. His flesh becomes like the basis for it. His blood becomes the ocean. His teeth become the cliffs. His bones become the mountains and the valleys. His hair becomes the forests and the plant life. It's like literally out of the carcass of Ymir, Earth is created. okay? And so this makes a lot of sense in the context of Attack on Titan, because, like, if you think about it, it's basically like a giant mech anime. Instead of giant mechs and robots, you have titans that they turn into. So it's very gooey and very viscerally and muscly and stuff, you know, and bones and stuff. Very significant imagery in Attack on Titan. So that's most likely where that comes from there. It's like literally the earth is created from the carcass of a giant. All right, so yeah, that makes sense there too. Also, the name of Ymir, seething clay, you know, building. You see how that worked with Ymir, you know, actually sculpting the giants out of clay. All right. So next, let's talk about this tree. All right, I want you to take a good look at this tree and see if you notice anything weird about it, okay? If you look off to the right of the tree trunk, you can make out what seems to be the face of a woman carved into the tree. If you look to the left of the tree, it's a little bit less apparent because the face of the man is buried into the trunk of it, so it's not sticking out like the woman's is, but there is another body kind of coming off to the left. And it seems like it's two people that are, like, melded into the tree, that are, like, holding this tree up in kind of this kind of pose, right? And then Ymir, the little girl Ymir, walks into the cavern in the middle of it, okay? And then falls down into this abyss filled with water, right? Okay, so what significance does this have? Well, it just so happens that the first two humans that were created in Norse mythology, Ask and Embla, were originally trees, or in some contexts they were made out of wood. I'm just gonna read this because, yeah, that's the thing about mythology. Like, in a perfect world, it'd be like, okay, here's your creation myth. It's, you know, these people in every single story, in every single context, in every single retelling, but that's not the case, all right? So, in some stories, it's Othin and his two brothers. In other contexts, it's Othin and his, not his brother, but Honir, or the Bright One, and then there was also Loki that was there as well. So the idea is they're walking along this shore, and they spy either two trees, an ash tree, which would be Ask, and then an elm tree, which would be Embla, or in other stories, they find just crude wood carvings. Where do the carvings come from? It's just whatever. They're walking and they see these trees that resemble humans, or these wooden carvings that sort of resemble humans, and they decide to breathe life into them. Othin is the one that provides the log's souls. Honir bestowed motion and sense, and Loki or Loder contributed the blood and the blooming complexions. So, they were endowed with speech and intelligence, and boom, the two humans were originally created, and then they populated Midgarth with their seed, I guess, is the best way to phrase that. Now, what's the deal with creation myths and trees? You know, Adam and Eve, you know, tree of knowledge, same deal. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, that's the creation myth for the first two humans, right? So that would kind of connect back to the tree. And also the idea that Ymir is going into that little cave in the, you know, bottom of it, which sort of resembles a, you know, like a thing. Yeah, okay, so yeah, symbolism. All right, so now, what's the deal with this thing? This weird centipede spine looking deal. Now, in the context of Attack on Titan, I have no idea. Your guess is as good as mine. This thing could have been an actual devil. This thing, Barry, why are you wearing a straw hat? We're not talking about One Piece today. This thing could be an alien, you know, like that crashed to Earth. Yeah, I don't know if I would be okay with the alien thing, but, you know, there's any number. Honestly, this thing reminds me of there's an old horror movie, an old B movie with Vincent Price back in the 50s called The Tingler. It's the story about this, like, kind of centipede spine creature that attaches onto you, and every time you feel terror or fear, it's that tingling sensation. That's the tingler. There's this creature that's growing inside of your spine that's like, ugh, and then eventually gets so big it rips out of you and, like, devours you. It's horrible, right? So, yeah, that's what this thing reminded me of, honestly. It's a weird reference, but there it is. So, okay, well, this is where we're gonna get a little bit out of Norse, and we're gonna go more into Celtic mythology here. All right, so not as much of an expert on this. I'm not saying I'm an expert on, I'm an expert. I probably mispronounced every single word here, but I will say that when it comes to the Celtic mythology, they have a little bit of a different kind of tradition on how it was passed down. Not so much written, more spoken word. Stories that bards would tell, so to speak, you know, just like verbally pass down these stories. So that makes it even a little bit more inconsistent because, you know, as stories go, they would be changed and modified to make it more exciting or, you know, change it around. It's like, oh, well, instead of these characters being there, these characters were there instead. So it's a little bit more scattershotted here. But the point is here, all I really want to talk about here in Celtic mythology is the Tree of Life, also named this, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, okay? But I'm sure you've probably seen images of the Tree of Life before. I'll throw up some artwork of the symbol or the logo of it or whatever. Okay, so a few things with the significance of this tree. The idea is that the tree is connected to everything. Okay, so connection to the coordinate and to the path there. Also, if you're just looking at the coordinate, I mean, it kind of looks like a tree, don't it? It's a tree. It looks like a tree with the branches coming off and connecting all the different descendants of Ymir and the Eldians and everything, and forging the Titan power and connecting it to everybody. And this is also the mechanism for when a Titan shifter passes away and doesn't have their power passed on to somebody else, like a random Eldian baby just receives that power. Yeah, it's all because of this path or this tree. So there you go there. The Celts, what they would do, what I understand is, you know, when they're clearing out fields for farmland, they would always leave a single tree in the farmland, which would be a very significant thing to their tribes. All right, so like the ultimate thing that you could do to cripple a tribe at this time would be to go into your enemy's camp and cut down this prized tree, right? That was like the ultimate thing that you can do to be like, yeah, screw you, right? So this also ties into the Celtic knots in a certain way. I'm sure you guys have all seen Celtic knots. There's a bunch of different ways you can draw them. And the idea here is eternity. You know, there's no beginning and there's no end. It's a knot. It's in this weird pattern that just goes on with no beginning and no end. And the idea is that Ymir is forced forever to be in this realm, constantly perpetuating this cycle, which she herself despises, but which she herself, though, cannot break because of these the bounds of slavery that still kind of hold her down these chains. And that's what Aaron kind of did, showed up at that moment with Zeke and, like, explained to her that's like, you don't have to do this anymore. It's not what you want to do. This is the time. This is the moment for you to finally be free. Okay, so that kind of brings us to, that kind of explains what the significance of the path or the coordinate is. It's a tree from Celtic mythology, and it's also kind of explains the whole idea of Ymir and the symbolism of the clay and this other realm and everything like that. And when it comes to that spine creature thing, I'm assuming that is because there's also, like, the talk that this tree also resembles or also connects to, like, the source of all organic matter. Like, this tree is literally the center of everything, okay? So that makes sense with Ymir going into this tree, falling into it, landing in this other world. The other world is where the gods reside in this context. So Ymir falls down into this other realm and then locates the source of all organic matter, and which is the Tree of Life, and then comes in contact with it, seemingly by accident. I want to focus on that point, because the mythology of it is that Ymir met this devil and then made a bargain with the devil, and many people were, like, hypositing that Aaron was the devil that she made a deal with. Like, Ymir was completely conscious at the time, and she was just like, I make a deal with you so we could crush the Marleyans and Eldia can reign supreme. That was the idea, but that doesn't seem to be the case. She was just running away. It was just an accident. That's the thing. Like, this entire thing, this circle jerk of all these titans for 2,000 years, I'll see you from now, 2,000 years from back then, all that crap that's going on right now, all these colossal titans breaking free from the walls to crush the world under their mighty feet, all of this started because a freaking pig got loose one day. It might have not even have been Ymir, alright? So it was just an accident. It seems like she just wanders into this tree, falls down into this other world, comes in contact with the source of all organic matter at the roots of this Tree of Life, becomes a titan, but she still has the slave mentality. King Fritz, you know, controls and manipulates her, so that's where the grudge that the Marleyans have against the Eldians come from, not because of Ymir, but because of King Fritz, that douche nozzle. And then after she dies, he just doesn't let the bloodline end. It's just like, I'm sure she thought like, oh, this is going to be it. I'm going to end it and everything's going to be done after this. But no, the bloodline continues. She's forced into existence because of what King Fritz does with her children, right? So it's like, damn. So at this point, I think the final panel of Attack on Titan, which Isayama revealed, over a year ago. It was like 2 years ago, I think. He reveals this final panel here. It's like a man holding a baby. The man might possibly be Eren. It might be somebody else. We don't know. But the baby is there, and the text is, "You're finally free," or "You're free now." All right. Now, originally, I was a really big fan of that Titan time loop theory, and I made a video about that a few months back. You can check that out there. Like everything is just this endless loop, and, it makes sense that Historia would give birth to a baby named Ymir, because Ymir and Historia had that, that romance together. Didn't really get off the ground too much, but it could have at that point. But anyway, yeah, it made sense that Historia would name her first child Ymir, and so that kind of begins the loop all over again. But now that we're seeing this, we kind of got a different story here, where Historia is going to give birth to a baby named Ymir, and the idea is like, okay, all of this is done, all of this is over, and you are free now. Not actually the same Ymir, but just a baby being born named Ymir, and the idea is, okay, you're free now. The struggle of your namesake, all the ones that came before us, it's all done now. But where does the rumbling come into this whole scenario? I don't know. Give me a second. All right, so talking about Ragnarok. I love that name. All right, so here's the deal. I think most people understand Ragnarok, big epic battle between the gods and the giants in Norse myth. Gods and giants don't like each other very much. They're the OG Naruto Sasuke rivalry. Don't like each other. No, that's not a good analogy, because they don't make up and become friends at the end of it. But anyway, yeah. So Ragnarok, big epic battle, which is triggered by the horn of Heimdall, which I actually have right here. So, Heimdall, blows his horn, and he's just like, time to get going, Ragnarok, o'clock, guys. And so we get going there, which could also represent maybe the Titan scream, or just the rumbling itself. The noise from that could be reminiscent of Heimdall blowing the horn, signifying the beginning of Ragnarok. Ragnarok is a bloody affair. A very bloody affair. Not very many gods or giants at the end of it make it out alive. At the end of this ordeal, when the entire world is basically swallowed up by earthquakes and then just washed over with ocean, and the world is basically, wiped clean and beginning anew. After all of that is done, you basically got Othin's children, Thor's children. The daughter of the sun will survive. Balder and his blind brother Hod will be freed from hell, and the world will begin again anew. Okay, so basically, I'm assuming this rumbling event, it's going to wipe out Paradise Island, and it's also probably going to wipe out the Marleyan Empire. Like, they're both just going to get destroyed, all right? And then, at the end of all of this, there's going to be a few people that are going to pull themselves out. Historia is going to be one of them. Out of this whole mess, there's going to be a lot of death here, because, Attack on Titan is no stranger to death of main characters, but this whole thing is going to end, and, the survivors of this cataclysmic apocalyptic event are going to give birth to a child, and that child's going to be named Ymir, and the world is going to begin anew with that child, in which whatever survivors might be left at that point, starting all over again, except this time, at least Ymir is free. The child is free, so she's not limited to this 2,000-year-old like loop. All right, so we're freed from that finally, and we can have hope for the future of the world after this whole rumbling business is through. So, did that make sense to anybody? Because I'll be honest with you, like, I've read most of these books before, and I'm not even sure if that made sense to me coming that out. Like, where did the cow come from? Why was there a cow there? I'm just like, well, there was. I don't know, man. But all right, so that's the story. If you want to learn more, visit your local library, I guess. No, seriously, read about Norse mythology. It's pretty cool. Like I said, I haven't read that much about Celtic, but it's interesting in its own right. So yeah, I mean, where we're gonna go from here, I'm actually curious. I legitimately am, because, like, if all of the Colossal Titans are waking up out of this wall, all the walls, and it's just like a domino effect. There might be a little bit of a grace period here. There might be a little bit of a moment where everybody can kind of like gather themselves, and all the Marleyans get back together, and all the all the Eldians get back together, and Mikasa's there and everything. They all get back together, and they're just like, okay, the walls are falling apart. It's going to be maybe a little bit until the giants start moving, until the Titans begin to flatten the entire world, and that all happens. But we probably don't have very long left for that to happen. So yeah, because you got to figure there's millions of these things. There's like literally tens of millions that cover these walls. So I don't know how they're gonna do this. I really have no idea where this is gonna go, because this is beyond just like, oh, there's one really strong opponent that woke up and we need to defeat them now. This is like millions. Like, in order to make this work, in order to have any hope here, you'd have to have like an army of Levi's and Mikasas in order to wipe out this entire armada of colossal titans. Levi comes back and he's like, I was in that other realm, and Ymir made an entire army of Levi's to fight these colossal titans. It was the only thing that could happen. And then that's the rest of the manga. An entire troop of Levi's just shreds all these colossal titans at once, and the world is saved, and Levi becomes the next king. How's that gonna happen? Like, we all know that's how the story's gonna end. But how are we gonna get to that point is really the question, right? So, yeah, I'm at a loss here. It was a really intense chapter. I don't even talk about Attack on Titan regularly, but people were just like, Matt, you gotta talk about this. You gotta talk about this. I mean, I get recommendations all the time, like, man, you need to make new reviews of Attack on Titan. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's not really, whatever, but not really my thing, and I tried it for a little while, didn't really take off too well, but it's like this one particular moment, it's just like, yeah, you need to talk about this. So, yeah, I hope I could have maybe shed some light on this, I guess, to all of you. Thanks for watching. This will be Tekking101 signing out. Later, everybody.